Okay, so I am streaming. We are streaming. Everybody's happy. If ever anybody wants to talk about the tier list, feel free. Where's the hero tier? Heroes is basically, honestly, guys, heroes are pretty good, but they're still practically rogue. I think heroes takes a little bit more experience than usual, but so far as I've been experiencing heroes, they have a little bit more gas now than usual. So I'm pretty sure they're close to tier 3. But overall, they're still practically rogue. Tier list, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, rogue, decks that are playable, and then decks that are not worth playing with the current format. First and foremost, we have branded SPS. So branded SPS, I would say they're still practically tier 2 for a deck. Understandably, they lost Gimmick Puppet, but overall, we still have Ra's Disciple, Jogan as well, that can stop special summons. And nevertheless, branded is still a pretty good deck without the Gimmick Puppet, so I don't really like to put Gimmick Puppet with branded that much in my deck. So even so, they're still practically a really good tier 2 deck. In my own opinion, it will be rogue for heroes. Many people, they still want to grind up. It's hard to play up against heroes nowadays, or hard to play up against a good hero player nowadays. The deck needs a pretty good pilot to work. Continue on with the tier list. Branded is still going to be tier 2. Centurions. I do think Centurions are a really good tier 3 deck. It can be paired with some other good decks that allows you to synchro summon into higher monsters. Centurions are practically tier 3, pretty good with some other archetypes as well. If you splash another minor engine with them, that's one of the reasons that they're going to be on tier 3. Fire Kings are basically tier 1, no questions asked. I'm also going to put Snake Eyes here. They are one of the best decks nowadays. I think Fire Kings generally is pretty good with Snake Eyes overall. Dinos, understandably, guys, it's not worth playing at the moment. The problem with Dinos is just it breaks from time to time. It is one of my favorite decks as well. If you just counter the Mist in the graveyard, or once they search from the graveyard, the Dino player can even make a really good board out of it. Floowandereeze, it's same as Dinos, but I think Dinos is far better. Floowandereeze now, I think they have some limited cards, although the support from the Raidraptor card was kind of important. But overall, still pretty bricky, same as Dinos. I do think that if ever one of the Floowandereeze cards might be semi-limited or up to one more copy, that would be somewhat better, that they would be placed on Rogue. But so far at the moment, I don't really see it like being the go-to deck for this meta. So we have Ghotis, we got the new Physics, and the other card that can spell summon one monster from the banish pile. That is kind of important. I would say they are now playable. Very more consistent than usual, but the problem with this is they usually takes up like 2 or 3 combos at a time, and then the board is basically just one monster, and then you interact with synchro summoning into another monster. You can just negate it with an Imperm or a Veiler during your opponent's turn, and Imperm is quite significant as well into their level 6, and they immediately stops off their combo. Still pretty good for a deck. Anyways, the water supports are kind of good also. If you add more water supports than usual with the Ghotis, it would be harder for you to counter against the meta if you're going second. Chimeras got one support. I think that was the Tau. Basically, it's still practically rogue, but the additional card is pretty nice, I would say. Exosisters, overall, they're still practically playable in my own opinion. Dinomorphias, pretty good rogue deck. Format is gonna be good for Dinomorphias if you're dealing with Snake Eyes Fire King. But if once you touch Masters, I think you're gonna see most of the players play out Yubel. Maybe higher than Chimeras, I guess, yeah. Labyrinth still pretty good for tier 2 decks. Labyrinth is pretty well-rounded in my own opinion. Kashtira's are pretty good for tier 3 decks. The variant for Kashtira's nowadays are stun. Basically, stun variants for Kashtira's are far better, I would say. Ice barriers, man, I did had a ton of hope for ice barriers to be good. They're pretty good, but for the event. If you're gonna play this in ranked, honestly guys, if you're gonna just summon a copy of one of your higher ice barrier monsters on the field, and then just leave it with that, I don't think that would be a really good end board, especially with the meta nowadays that has 1-card starters. I think that Ice Barriers would be a little bit better if they would unban. Totally awesome. It's not really worth playing. Vanadium are practically rogue. They're still pretty good though. I think Calamity was their win condition in most of their games. But I think Centurion is still pretty good though, even though their ceiling is not that high. But yeah, Vanadium is practically rogue. Horus Stun. I would say another good variant as well. The stun variant is kind of weird though, but they are pretty strong. Infernoble is practically tier 3, and the reason for this is if they are paired with Mekankos. Infernobles and Mekankos are the best choice. Same goes with Mekankos. Heroes, like I said earlier, Rogue, but they are a little bit better nowadays. Yeah, I think they're far better than Chimeras, I would say. Mathmech, tier 2. As long as Circular is on 3 copies, they're practically tier 2. At the moment, for Memento, they're not worth playing, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, Mementos are kind of fun to play, but at the moment, they're not worth playing. Pendulum Magicians, one of the strongest variants nowadays for Pendulum Magicians is with the Zark supports, and that made it a little bit more consistent for Pendulum Magicians to work. They're practically pretty good for tier 3. One comment before I said that Raidraptors was on tier 3 or lower tier 3, I guess. I was really coping because I tried the deck for a couple of ranks. There are some tendencies where you'll break into the rank up cards, and we're in a format where one card is really important, and this is one of the decks that can actually summon a Kali Yuga to the field, which is another floodgate at its own right. I think I was just scoping so much that this deck would be so good because they have a higher attack or whatsoever, but practically they're just basically rogue. The supports are pretty good though. The supports that came from the Wings of the Guardian was good, but not to an extent that they would be on tier 3 or whatsoever. Rescue Ace, pretty good for a tier 2 deck. The Impulse it took wasn't really that significant. They're still pretty strong. Resonators, Rogue decks, yeah, I think they're far better than Chimeras, I would say. But they can eventually be stopped by a copy of Nibiru. Purelease, I would say tier 3. The variant for Ghost Trick is still very powerful, and I think the ability to search out the trap cards is easy enough to access for this type of deck. So they're pretty good for tier 3 decks. Naturias are not worth playing unless you pair it with another deck. Rikas at the moment, as what I've experienced so far, once we get the new supports for the Ragnaraikas by next month, this is going to be like a really good tier 3 deck in my own opinion. At the moment, I think Grind Game is still pretty good with this deck. Ceiling is way too high, but they're pretty good. Punks, pretty much playable. Grind Game is good. Draw power is good. Endboard is not that great. Same goes with Super Heavy. I think the reason why I put this unplayable is because we got Wagon back to 3 copies, but the Soul Piercer was too significant enough was of a hit that I just put this unplayable. Also, you are going to be prone to Maxi, Nibiru. Yeah, not Maxi and Nibiru. I think Nibiru is the most common problem for this deck. But unless if you pair it with another variant though, that would be somewhat different. But overall, playable in my own opinion. Sky Strikers, pretty good for Rogue deck. Grand Game will be pretty good with Sky Strikers. There are the variants for going second for this deck. Sword Soul, let's be honest, because if you're just gonna depend too much on Protoss, you still have Fire Kings and Snake Eyes as one of the top decks. They cannot be countered by just Protoss. Salaman Great, practically Rogue. Grand Game is okay with this deck, and Recursion is great with this deck. Recovery is also great. This is one of the decks that I really want to play if I'm not playing Mathmech. Runics, not worth playing unless you pair it with another variant. Sharks, they are playable nowadays because of the supports that they got from the Wings of the Guardian. Similar to Ghotis, they're practically good if you're gonna use it on an event or something. Scareclaws, not worth playing. Honestly, guys, depending on your monsters in the field that can easily be negated is hard. But yeah, not worth playing. Sprites are practically rogue. I do think that if we get another Sprites up to another copy, like a copy of Jet or a copy of Blue, this might be a really good tier 3 deck, if ever that would be the case, or if ever some of the supports for Sprites would be increased to a significant number or an understandable number. Maybe they'll be back to tier 3. Tier elements, even if you're using it with Horus or just tier elements in general, they're still basically pretty good. Yubel is basically tier 1, no questions asked. Unchained, if you're gonna play Yubel with Unchained, they are tier 1. But if you play Unchained with a small engine for Yubel, they're practically rogue. But they're still pretty good though, popping cards on the field. Well, Monica's not worth playing. Before, I had fun with this deck, and honestly, this is one of the fun decks that I actually played with as a Pendulum. Ceiling's not that high. There are some other good variants where you play it with Synchron, but let's be honest, always depending on your Pendulum cards to have some counters isn't the way to go. And if ever that Pendulum card got removed with your counters, there's no way to like summon another monster to the field that can gain you a win condition. One of the issues for Valmonicas is if ever you get wiped, you're gonna have a slim chance of recovering on the next turn. Voiceless Voice, practically tier 3. But if this got released earlier than Bell, I think this would be on tier 2. Vanquish Soul, pretty good tier 3 deck. I think you just need a good pilot for this deck. And this is one of the decks that can actually use Shifter to its full advantage, so tier 3. Trap checks. Well, I'm just gonna put this on playable. Maybe when we get Ragnarok, this would change. Yeah, Tri Brigade, not worth playing. I think if you pair it with Fire Kings, that would be a really good rogue deck. But so far, if you're gonna play it as a whole, it's not worth playing. But anywho, that is our tier list for today, guys. I think that's really understandable if we're gonna put Horror Stun on tier 3. They're still very good though. So that's that. But anyways, that is the tier list. What do you think, guys? Please tell me in the comment section below. I'll see you guys in the next video, and we'll still continue on with the stream. See you later.